Hi everyone, I am Tina Swithin, author of Divorcing a Narcissist and founder of One Mom's Battle. And I am so incredibly excited about this collaboration today. It's part one of two of a sit down that I had with Dr. Ramani, the amazing Dr. Ramani, and also Rebecca Zung, top 1% attorney. And we are talking about divorcing a narcissist or child custody with a narcissist from three different angles. My angle, which was someone who was in pro per, self-represented in family court because I could not afford an attorney. I know many of you share that struggle. Either you start off in pro per or you hire an attorney and then quickly realize how expensive they are and that it's just not realistic to continue. So you end up in pro per or in pro se. And then the legal perspective from Rebecca Zung, and also the psychological perspective from Dr. Ramani. What is going on in the mind of a narcissist during a divorce or a child custody battle? So this is going to be a fascinating two-part segment. Make sure you are subscribed to my channel so you are notified that part two goes live, and then also so you're notified any other time we have fantastic content to help you along in your journey. I always say my kids are safe at this point after a 10-year journey, but I know yours aren't. And until they are, I'm going to keep doing this. So thank you so much for joining us and enjoy today's powerhouse collaboration.
Well, I'm so excited to be here today with, I'm Rebecca Zung. We have Dr. Ramani, we have Tina Swithin, and we're going to be talking today about One Mom's Battle and divorcing a narcissist without a lawyer. And we have Tina Swithin, who founded One Mom's Battle, who's absolutely incredible, who figured out how to navigate the system on her own, and I'll let her tell about herself, and Dr. Ramani, who is the foremost authority expert in the world on narcissism, who's a licensed clinical psychologist. And we have me, who's a top 1% divorce attorney and also do quite a lot with narcissism and how to divorce a narcissist and negotiate with a narcissist. So Tina, why don't you go ahead and start with your background and your story?
Okay. So, and something I don't normally talk about, my life actually started in the family court system. When I was 6 months old, my parents went through a divorce, and back in the 70s, moms automatically got custody. And my mom actually had mental health conditions that made her an unhealthy parent. So when I was a little over 6 months old, my dad won custody of me, and he and I grew up together because he was only 19 at the time. And
Really?
yes, and so
Wow.
yeah, and so I bring a different perspective to it. I've always been very pro healthy parent, based on my own experience in life. But then as a 26-year-old girl, thought I was making all the right choices. I met this knight in shining armor, um, just overwhelmed me with gifts and trips and compliments and flowers. And, it was just this whirlwind romance, which I had never experienced before. And in my mind, I thought, wow, this is what it's like to date an adult, a man, where I had, younger relationships prior to that. So um, it wasn't as rosy as it presented itself to be in the beginning. We got married very quickly. It was a very fast and quick courtship and marriage. And I remember about 7 years into my marriage, we had two daughters, and they were really little at the time. They were just under 2 and 4. And I was I remember saying to my husband at the time, I've never felt so alone in my life. And I didn't know how to make sense of it. And he had me questioning, my own sanity, and he would constantly say, your mom suffered from mental health issues. That's why you cry, and for me, and I would bounce it off people who knew me, they were saying, no, when you cry, it's because, somebody died, or these are normal, your emotions are not abnormal. But, and then I found out that we were in debt to the tune of $1.6 million.
Wow.
We had, our entire life was a facade. I found out, my world turned upside down. I grew up, not in that type of lifestyle, but with the narcissist, what I came to find out is, image is so important to them. And to my ex-husband, the huge house in the gated community, the fancy cars, this lifestyle that we were living, that was what he, that was his image. And so when it all came crashing down and I found out that he had been borrowing against our house and borrowing from people, and it was just, I couldn't even grasp that dollar amount. um, I ended up in a therapist's office. First, I begged him to go to therapy with me, and he said, "You are the one with problems. You go see a therapist." And so I said, "Fine, I'll go work on myself." And I remember sitting there and talking to this woman for an hour and a half. We went way over my first consult. And she got up, went across the room, brought back a book, opened it up, and said, "I want you to read this section." And it was narcissistic personality disorder.
Wow.
And I was just, the fixer in me back then was actually so excited because I thought, we now have a label. I now understand everything that has happened. And now how do we fix him? And, and I'm a loyal person and I see the best in people. And so I'm a perfect target. But
Exactly. Yeah.
um, she basically told me that day, you either accept that this is your life and there's no fixing this, or you leave. And it took a while for that to sink in. It was about another 6 months. And then he came back at me when he knew I wanted to leave. And he said, "Listen, find a male PhD and I will agree to go to therapy with you." And I said, "I will do anything." And about 6 months into it, the psychologist said, "I think a personality or a psychological examination could be really helpful for us to try to figure out what's going on here." And that was the day my husband said, "It's over, we're done," and accused me of manipulating the psychologist. And that kind of started our divorce. And even in those moments, even though I had seen through him, I had seen behind the mask, I knew what I was up against, I was still so optimistic that, well, first of all, I was probably a little hopeful that because he had never participated in our children's lives, that I didn't understand really what NPD, a narcissistic personality disorder, was. And so I was hopeful that he would step up to the plate and actually have a relationship with our daughters, and that we could be decent co-parents together, because I'm a person who, I hate conflict. If you're mad at me, I will stay up all night thinking about it. And so I went in just so naive, thinking, we're going to have this great custody arrangement. He's going to have to actually bond with the girls. I didn't realize that wasn't possible. And it kind of, as soon as he filed for divorce, he was the one that beat me to it. He was actually two people in line in front of me at the
Oh,
window
that's
to file.
crazy.
And I'm sitting there watching him do this in line, and he doesn't know I'm there. And I thought I was going to have a panic attack watching this whole thing take place in front of my eyes. And, it became World War III immediately.
Sure. Yeah.
And Yeah, so I ended up, going from our whole financial world had crashed down during that time period, lost our home, lost our cars, lost our businesses. And then I had this new fear, which was the fear for my life. And what I quickly came to discover is that domestic violence advocates, they don't, if you, well, at least 10 years ago, and what I still find today, if you haven't been physically abused, they don't give it a lot of weight. And so I remember checking myself
It's
into the
still that
women's
way.
shelter.
I think it's still that way.
It is. It's unfortunate. And so there was one morning things had gotten really badly, and I woke up at 6 a.m. to a series of these just crazy voicemails on my phone, and packed my little girls in the car and drove to a women's shelter and checked ourselves in. And the most humbling few days of my entire life. And that kind of started off our journey. And even, I remember leaving the women's shelter. I had appealed to the court to get exclusive use of the home so that I could go back home, and he had to stay out. And he violated that order within 24 hours. And I just knew, this is going to be an absolute nightmare. I feel like the day that I got my paperwork served, the divorce paperwork and that case number, it came with my own personal terrorist. And that's really the best way I can describe what happened.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many things that I want to say. And I know I was looking at Dr. Ramani and she was shaking her head, nodding her head during a lot of what you were saying too. So I want her to weigh in on some of this. But I want you to just, if you could just highlight for the listeners and the viewers about how you got the attention of Christy Brinkley, because I think that's a really cool part of your story. And I want to make sure you mention that
Sure.
early on.
So because of the severe financial abuse that I was experiencing in our marriage, he was able to afford an attorney. I could not. And so, I went into my custody battle back in 2009 in pro per. And a lot of people will say, why would you do that? And, I didn't have a choice. I went from a almost $2 million home to driving to a food pantry to feed my daughters. And so buying an attorney or paying for an attorney was just not in the cards for me. Those first couple days, I looked like a deer in headlights in that courtroom. For the first 2 years, I looked like a deer in headlights in that courtroom. And, it was incredibly difficult. I remember about a year and a half into it, I was just so frustrated. And I remember talking to my dad on the phone one day, and he said, march into that courtroom and tell that judge that you are not putting those little girls in the car with him this weekend. He is not safe. And I just thought, nobody gets it. Even the people in my circle who love me and love my kids, nobody understands what I'm up against. And I had such a deep frustration with telling everybody what was happening that I said, I'm going to start a blog. I remember looking at Glenn, my friend back then. I'm married to him now. And I remember saying, I'm going to start a blog. I'm going to call it One Mom's Battle, because I truly feel like the only person in the entire world going through this. And then friends and family can follow along. I didn't plan for anyone else in the world to read this blog except my close circle, just so I didn't have to tell the story over and over. And I had been doing that for about 6 months, happened to be home one day and never ever watched TV, happened to turn on the TV, Today Show was playing, and Christy Brinkley was being interviewed by Matt Lauer. And it was just off in the distance. I wasn't really paying attention. I'm typing, I'm working, and I hear him just berating her and saying, why can't you get along for the sake of the kids? And at that point I tuned in and went, what is this? And she said, Google the term divorcing a narcissist. And she was choking back tears, which then I started crying because I'm going, this poor woman, I don't even know who she is. I want to jump through the screen and hug her. That night, my blog, because back then was really one of the only resources available to people going through this situation, went from 40 views a month, which was me and my family, to literally 40,000 overnight. And just from people Googling that term. And then when I woke up the next day, my email was filled with people from all over the world saying, thank you. Thank you for speaking out. We're in silence. We're suffering and, isolation. And then a few days later, Christy Brinkley had her assistant contact me and invited me down to Los Angeles to meet with her a couple weeks after that, which I did. And, she basically said, you need to keep speaking, you need to keep telling your story, and I'll support whatever you do and help to publicize it and bring it into the light. And so it was shortly after that that I started writing my first book. And she was a huge supporter to me. She was going through the same thing. And luckily, her daughter is now aged out of the system. But, it goes to show that no matter who you are, rich, poor, it doesn't discriminate. This type of issue affects everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny because as I'm hearing you from the divorce attorney's perspective, tell your story about the kinds of things he started doing right away as soon as the papers were filed. It's so typical. It's literally, they're completely predictable in their heinous behavior. And we're going to get into more of what the tricks narcissists play, but I want to go back to your very first part of your story where you were talking about how you had a therapist who got up and picked up this book and showed you the description of narcissistic personality disorder. I'm just thinking how lucky you are that you found a therapist who recognized the signs of that, because I think that there are a lot of therapists who would have just said, oh, just try to work it out, or let's bring him in here, let's try to talk, or something like that. And I want Dr. Ramani to weigh in on that, and what your thoughts are on that, because, from my perspective as a layperson in that field, I think, wow, how lucky she was. She found the right therapist early on. What do you think?
Yeah, Tina, in your case, absolutely, it was really good fortune. I would say that was like a 1 in 10 shot, that you would have been sitting in a room with a therapist who was willing to call the pattern out as what it was. And I've always been a big believer, and in the majority of the work I've been doing around sort of narcissistic abuse survivorship, is that the quicker people got information, the more likely they were to make sense of it. Now, people say, why is that? Why can't the therapist just call this person out? Had I known this a long time ago, this would have been useful. There's a lot of reasons, and a lot of them are probably, more detailed than anyone wants to hear. But in the world of, first of all, most therapists, psychologists, MFTs, social workers, even psychiatrists are not trained heavily in these patterns, believe it or not. Like, I actually got some of my training by luck because of a supervisor I had while I was at UCLA. The rest of it was a lot of being self-taught and having these cases. But I was actually very struck by how little training. We don't get a course in this. We don't get a course in narcissistic personality. We don't even get a course in personality disorders. So A, it's not part of our teaching. B, there's a tremendous reluctance in the field to make too much commentary about somebody who's not in the session. I actually don't agree with that, because I don't think we all live in vacuums. I think there's things happening around us. And I think it's really incumbent on a therapist to say, listen, I think that we cannot diagnose someone we haven't met for a variety of reasons, but we sure as heck can comment on their patterns. We can certainly say, well, that doesn't seem like a very nice thing. Now, if you expand that out a little bit, say, these patterns you're describing, to the degree they're accurate, and I'm assuming they are consistent with these patterns. I think we can do that. And for me, the awakening I'm trying to create in the therapeutic community is talk about this with your clients. You're not a bad person. You're not judging, but we've got to open up the lens. And Tina, you did have a unique experience in that I have clients come in, and within 10 minutes, I'm like, yeah, we got that narcissism piece down. Now, how about you? And then we can work with them.
Yeah. And that's what really struck me too, how lucky you were to have found the right person like right away. So Dr. Ramani, would you say if somebody is, they've done the reading, they've done the research, they've read your books, they've watched, your videos, or and they're pretty sure that that's what they're dealing with, and they go into a therapist's office and the therapist says, no, it's not a narcissist. You're just being overreactive, or you're just throwing the term around because you've heard it, a thousand times now. What would you say? Go, keep on going, find a different therapist.
Here's the other, it's never going to be that black and white, Rebecca. It's not like the therapist can say, no, it's not that. What the therapist may often do is engage in this sort of like backpedaling, where they'll say, well, your partner did have a history of trauma, and some of this may be associated with trauma, which is often true. But by doing that, they're already activating something in the person who went through this narcissistic relationship, who's been making excuses for this person for 1 year, 5 years, 20 years, 50 years. They did go through trauma. They did have a hard childhood. So the therapist then ends up almost re-trapping the client. I would say that when you know this and you feel comfortable in this, and your therapist, at a minimum, even if they won't call the person out as a narcissist, but they're not willing to call the pattern out as toxic, find a new therapist. I mean, it is amazing. I'm feeling, oh, I don't want to. A, it's a nuisance to find a therapist, but B, you don't like what that therapist is saying, you don't feel comfortable, get out and find someone else. I tell people that all the time. You don't like me, I'm good with that. You're not going to hurt my feelings. I want you to grow. But I think that's the other problem, is it's not, it's like, they're not a narcissist. They try to backpedal, and that confuses the client, who already is confused coming into the office.
Yeah. And I would say the same thing with lawyers. I mean, it's really, really hard to find lawyers who understand narcissism. I just spoke to a new client for my law practice this morning who's been dealing with a narcissist. I mean, 5 minutes into the conversation, I could tell that her ex-husband was a flaming narcissist. And, the lawyer that she has is just kind of being, sort of, well, we don't need to, be so aggressive right away. Let's wait and see. And then that just gives the narcissist lots of room to just keep on going. And so, so one of the things, just so I can comment a little bit on how narcissists become problematic in divorces right away, just listening to what Tina was saying is, once the divorce is filed, even if they file, it does trigger that narcissistic rage. And so they start in on all of these things that they're going to try to project, that you're the bad person, they're the good one, that, so they start gaslighting, they start obstructing, they start like, no, that discovery will be filed on time. You're going to have to go through 50,000 hoops to go get it. They're going to lie about everything. They're going to, send text messages that confirm things, conversations that never took place. They're going to start in on the smear campaign, telling everybody that, you were always a drunk, or you were a terrible mother. And so they start engaging in these manipulation tactics right away to try to manipulate the system, meaning the judges, the lawyers, the mediators, and anybody else that may be involved, whether it's a custody evaluator or even a forensic accountant. It doesn't really matter who it is, but if this person is involved somehow in this case, they want to be darn sure that they're the ones that come out looking fantastic and amazing, and the other person looks like the complete loser. And it's not just, the end game. There's, you keep, as a reasonable person will go, what is it that they want? I'll just give it to them. There is no what they want. What they want is to continue to feed their need for narcissistic supply by controlling you and manipulating you and making you look bad and triangulating and doing all the things. They grab their flying monkeys and get them all on their side. And so that you think that you're going to be alone, so that you think that no one's going to believe you, that everyone's going to believe their lies. And so you, as the target, sit there and go, well, I can't win. There's nothing I can do to win. This person is going to control the entire process. I don't have the money. I don't have the stamina. I don't have the time, the energy, the mental capacity, name it. Right.
It's right.
So, maybe you want to talk a little bit more about the types of tricks that your former husband played in the divorce, and then we can talk about, what's going on with them psychologically, from the psychological perspective when all that's happening.
Right. I know that very quickly, he weaponized my children. He knew that that was the one way to hurt me. He knew that that was my biggest button. I always tell people, figure out what their biggest buttons are, their biggest triggers. I know you call it leverage and, that type of thing. And that, it's so true. I knew very early on that money was his button. One of the things I was up against is that I've always maintained my custody battle wasn't just with him, it was with his mom. It
Oh,
was with
yeah.
his dad, who both had standings in our community. They had founded a local Catholic high school. They had, their roots in pretty deep here. And so he went on a smear campaign telling, we were active in the business community, telling everybody that I had, had affairs. I've never cheated on anyone in my life. And so it was painful at the time, but he knew that my kids were the way to hurt me. And so not telling me where they were going to be on visits, he would give me addresses, and they were always in gated communities, so I couldn't access the house. But I remember having a realtor friend take me in because I knew he was lying about where he was keeping my kids, and I was completely distraught. um, we would go to the address and it would be an empty dirt lot in a gated community. And
Oh,
and
God.
the court just kept giving him so much grace. They would give me almost like he had just made a mistake giving me the address, and then it would be 2 or 3 different fake addresses, to where the court finally started cracking down on him. But we the court in the beginning, for the first, I'd say 2 years, lumped us both into the high conflict category. And I
It's
didn't.
very common.
Absolutely. And so, we would go into the courtroom and the judge would look at me and go, Swithin, what are you on the docket for today? And I'd be like, well, like, I'm here to protect my kids. And we were in court a lot. 2012, I took him to court 13 different times. And my mentality was, if you're not going to protect my kids this month, I'm going to just keep coming back over and over again, because I need to lay my head down on a pillow knowing that I've done everything in my power this week to protect them. And he was putting them in dangerous situations and, never knowing where they were. He has family members who are very dysfunctional. It was a big part of my battle, trying to protect my kids from people in his family. And so he had a high off of using them to just torment me, and it was painful. I'm so thankful that we aligned with therapists early on, for my kids even, who understood what I was up against. I know how blessed I am with that, because, and I do feel that so much of it is in how you present yourself. And I was very careful to remove myself from the conflict and tell them, I don't care if you believe his story or my story. That's not what I'm here for. I need my little girls to have tools to navigate what I'm having a hard time navigating as a 40-year-old woman. And so I'm incredibly thankful that we had people, but that wasn't always the case. We went through 2 full custody evaluations here in California. Minors counsel was appointed. I had CPS involved in my case 3 times, and 90% of those people completely failed my kids. And my battle, so my, oh,
Tell more about that. Like, in what way? How did they fail them?
CPS, in my opinion, the most broken agency in this whole family court arena. My kids were almost drowned in a swimming pool. I feel like my ex-husband is more in the sociopathic category. To this day, I feel like it was not accidental that they almost drowned. And he admitted that they almost drowned. CPS was called. They gave him a pamphlet on pool safety, and closed it unfounded, even though he admitted that they almost drowned. He left my daughter in a car for 45 minutes while he watched a triathlon on TV in a gym, when she had just been released from the hospital after having a 45-minute seizure with orders to never leave her alone. She was 4. And he admitted that he left her in a car with the windows cracked for 45 minutes. And they gave him a slap on the wrist and said, or hand, and said, let's talk about car safety. You can't leave kids in a car. And they closed it unfounded. So
was this before or after the pool incident? I mean, come
that
on.
was before the pool incident. And then he physically assaulted my older daughter when she was 7, grabbed her by the arm. I went to the police station with her, marked it as unfounded. They did label him a moderate risk, but they did nothing. And so, it just, in our first custody evaluation, I was so new into this and still had not connected all of the dots that the reason my case was so high conflict was because he was a narcissist. I just thought, what the hell? I just feel like I don't even understand. I'm in some warped reality. And, the first custody evaluator, I was not, at that point, I hadn't established patterns of behavior to truly explain to her what was going on and to articulate the issues. And she was just, a lot of them, the second they get a case, their goal is to close it and be done with it. And they don't really do the work. And I think that, the threshold of what's acceptable when it comes to parenting for me is a heck of a lot different than the rest of the family court system.
Well, I think the problem with anything like CPS or agencies like that is that they're so used to seeing, the kids who are living in complete squalor, they're just used to going in, let's check to make sure there's food in the refrigerator, and, something like that. And so when they see, upper middle class or middle class family who the parents are going through a bad divorce, it's like, here we go again. They're just trying to use us as leverage to try to gain some kind of, advantage in the divorce. And let's just get this thing off of our thing. And it's the same thing with judges, quite frankly. I mean, judges are evaluated based on how quickly they move their cases off their docket. They're also evaluated on how often they're appealed. And they have way too many cases on their docket. They're already super backlogged, and hundreds of cases are being filed every single month in every single jurisdiction, maybe even thousands depending on where people live. And there's only a handful of judges on the family law bench. Most of the judges who sit on the family law bench don't even want to be on the family law bench. They're rotated through different sections of the court system, and family law is the one that nobody wants. Right. And so there's a few family law judges that are devoted to family law, and they stay in the family law arena for a long time, and then those are the ones that end up writing textbooks and things like that. But for the most part, and there are a few that were family law attorneys, but for the most part, you're getting judges who don't understand family law. They don't want to be there. They have too many cases, and they just want to move them along. And they just see two people who are fighting. They're just like, oh, here we go again. Two people who are fighting.
And I think a lot of them are so highly narcissistic themselves that they can't even recognize the issues in front of them because it so closely relates to who they are.
Oh, that's so true too. So Dr. Ramani, how about let's bring you in on this and what's going on psychologically with a narcissist during a divorce.
I mean, listen, it comes down, a narcissist is actually the most extraordinarily easy human being to understand. It's interesting to me how everyone's befuddled by them. They're actually more easy to understand than me, because I'm actually motivated by lots of complicated things. So understanding someone who's healthy is challenging. Understanding someone who's narcissistic is actually like trying to understand a rat in a maze. As long as you can, and you've called it leverage. I think it goes beyond that, though. I mean, at the end of the day, the narcissist is motivated by protecting their own insecurity. That's what it is for them. They feel chronically, strangely, we feel unsafe with them. Well, that's a projection. They chronically feel threatened by the world. They chronically feel unsafe. So all of these defenses, the arrogance, the entitlement, the grandiosity, all of it is designed to protect their fragile egos. And in that quest, the best tool for that is narcissistic supply. Narcissistic supply comes from two paths. Path number one is the traditional validation. Tell me I'm great. Tell me I'm wonderful. Tell me what a great guy I am. Tell me how successful I am. Look at my big house. Look at my big car. Look at my big this. Look at my big that. That's path one. But we forget that the second path of narcissistic supply is conflict. They really, really enjoy their ability to intimidate, oppress, and bully other people. What does it do? It gives them, just like the playground bully, a false sense of strength that protects that insecurity. So it really is very easy to understand them. I think what throws people off is that they think narcissistic supply is only the good stuff, the really big ticket validating stuff, like you're so great, look at my big car. The other side of it, though, that they kind of enjoy conflict. It's always about the win for them, but ultimately the win is one more source of supply. So it's really the clearest lens to view all of this through. And when we realize narcissistic supply is actually a complex space, that also makes this a bit easier, as it were, to understand. And I think the challenge is, even as I hear Tina's story, you and I have talked about cases on both of our ends, is that obviously once you're in it and there's high stakes, there's children, there's material issues like, supports and financial issues and all of that, it starts getting challenging, especially if you're beholden to them. And anyone who's in a joint custody situation is beholden to them because they want to keep their children safe. And so, but that's really what the motivator is. I mean, it really is. They care very much about what the world thinks of them. Again, why? Because they're insecure. Secure people, I don't care what anyone thinks of me. I mean, I don't think I've changed my sweatpants in 3 days. Like, I don't care. Now everybody knows, it's the not caring. And they care so desperately. So even while they're contemptuous of other people, contemptuous of their relationships, honestly, they're contemptuous of them because it's a defense, because they need their approval so much. So actually very easy to understand. Rats in a maze. That's it. Rats in a maze.
Yeah, but then the way it manifests itself is just heinous, and especially...
It's absolutely heinous. As all insecure people, the most insecure people in our midst are often the most dangerous, because they're going to do anything to protect their insecurity. So it is heinous, absolutely.
Yeah, and especially in a divorce, because they just have this incredible need for self-preservation, and it's like they're the fight of their life. I mean, they're in this massive survival mode, but then their target is also in survival mode, because they know they're under attack, they're under siege, and they're under siege in a way from this person. And this is what I always say the divorce paradox is, which is during the worst, most horrible and traumatic time of your life. I mean, if you look at any polls on what's the most traumatic thing that humans can deal with, it's always death and divorce are at the top. And I think prison is in there somewhere, but prison's actually lower than divorce. Like, people would rather be in prison than get a divorce. But during the worst, most traumatic time of your life, you have to make the most critical decisions of your life. And so you're under siege, and it's bad enough when you're divorcing normally, but then when you add on the layer of divorcing a narcissist, now you're trying to make decisions about your money, your home, your children, all the things that mean the most to you, your business, potentially, while you're under siege and while you're trying to heal yourself. I mean, people who've been in narcissistic relationships for long periods of time are like PTSD. I mean, they're seriously, traumatized, and they're trying to make decisions. So, for example, this woman I spoke to this morning, she wants to change her custody arrangement. She said that, when she entered into the custody agreement at the time, she was so terrorized by him. She just wanted to get out of it. She just wanted to be done. And so she agreed to stuff that she didn't want, now she regrets, So what I'd like to hear from Tina is, how did you keep your mindset strong? How were you able to keep going and not give up and keep yourself healthy?